Okay, good morning and welcome to this morning's Government Affairs Forum featuring Attorney General Maura Healey. I'm Jim Rooney, President and CEO of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. Hey, how about that? That's one way to quiet a room, I guess. It's great to be in person with these events again, and especially today to hear from Attorney General Healey, a Chamber Pinnacle Award winner. Attorney General Healey, also known as the People's Lawyer, has been joining us as a featured speaker for all of her years in this position, and now this is her concluding address to the business community as the Commonwealth's Attorney General. But as I'm sure all of you know, Maura is running for governor, and just this past weekend received the Democratic Party nomination with 70% of the vote. So congratulations, Attorney General, on that. And we're also pleased that after her remarks to this audience, the Attorney General will be spending time with our Chamber City Awake program members of young professionals. I want to thank the Attorney General for making that extra time and always prioritizing the region's young talent. On behalf of the business community, I want to recognize a few people who have joined us today. A couple of former House chairs of the Ways and Means Committee. I wish they were still Ways and Means chairs. Maybe we could get some business done this morning if they were still doing that job. But former Chairman Brian Dempsey and Jeffrey Sanchez are here today. And we're also joined by a longtime friend, former President of the Boston City Council and candidate for Attorney General, Andrea Campbell. Andrea, thank you for joining us today. Former Massachusetts Senator Paul White. Paul. Former Minority Leader in the Massachusetts Senate, Richard Tassay. Richard. Right there. Former Massachusetts State Senator Steve Bedore. Steve, I saw. And former Massachusetts State Representative Andrew Petrocelli. Thank you, Anthony Petrocelli. I also want to take a few moments to highlight some upcoming Chamber events that may be of interest. On June 21st, we'll be joined again at this Government Affairs Forum featuring Senate President Karen Spilka, so mark that on your calendar. On June 14th, we have a very special Women's Network breakfast featuring women leaders in STEM industries. So maybe a panel of interest to you or someone on your team. And on June 16th, we're convening our next event in the Future of Work series focused on downtown revitalization and how to get that energy back into the downtown of Boston. So you can find out more about those events and all Chamber activities events on bostonchamber.com. We're almost ready to welcome the Attorney General, but before I do, I want to thank our longtime partner and sponsor of these Government Affairs Forums, Bank of America. Thank you to Mihal Chamberlain, President of Bank of America in Massachusetts, for that long-standing partnership. And I want to welcome Mihal in just a minute, but usually I save my questions until the speaker is finished. But I do have a question that I hope the Attorney General will address as part of her remarks. It's an issue that keeps me up at night, and I'm sure it keeps many of you up at night. And given her lived experiences, she's uniquely positioned to help us understand this. And I hope, Attorney General, you'll be direct and not diplomatic in your answers in your remarks on this issue, which is, how can the Celtics win their 18th championship and stop Seth Curry and the Warriors? So, with that, Mihal Chamberlain, please join me on stage.
Thanks, Jim. I look forward to the Attorney General's answer on that as well. And good morning, everyone. It's great to be back. We had Speaker Mariano a week and change ago, and it's good to get back in a rhythm. Although we couldn't hear Jim for the first couple minutes, it gave me great pleasure to see everybody networking and enjoying themselves at the breakfast again here live. So I want to express my thanks, Jim, as well, for the longstanding partnership we have with you and the Chamber. It gives us a lot of pride to host these government affairs forum every year, and I really look forward to the Attorney General's comments this morning. And on behalf of my colleagues here at Bank of America, I just want to welcome everyone to today's breakfast, where we will have our special guest, Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey. Since taking office in 2015, Attorney General Healey has been dedicated to serving as the people's lawyer by advancing public safety and protecting the rights of all Massachusetts residents. Attorney General Healey has worked to tackle serious challenges facing the Commonwealth, including mental health, the heroin and prescription drugs epidemics, escalating health care costs, workers' rights, and student loan costs. Further, in 2015, her office became the first state agency to offer paid paternal leave to all employees. Prior to serving as Attorney General, she served Middlesex County as Special Assistant District Attorney for 7 years. And let's not forget, she was elected into the New England Basketball Hall of Fame in 2006. We're so grateful to have Attorney General serving the Commonwealth. She's a fantastic leader, collaborator, and we're fortunate to have her with us this morning. So without further ado, please welcome Attorney General Maura Healey to the stage.
Well, thanks, Mihal. And I guess to get right to it, I think they've got to take care of the ball, because they haven't been doing that lately. Or erratically. They can't be erratic. They need to be really tough on defense, and smart's got to be smart. Take good shots, better shots, and they got to take care of the ball. And hopefully Williams is not injured, and they can out-tough the Warriors, who played with a little bit of surprising toughness the other night. But we're back in Boston, on to Banner 18. I'm confident as a team they can go out and get this done. And isn't that really exciting? We're back in a finals. Yeah. It's exciting. It's great. And I am excited. I'm excited to be here this morning. I am grateful always to Mihal. Thank you for that introduction. And to Jim and the staff, the team at the Chamber. It's been a privilege to come before you every single year. And I want to acknowledge that, of course, I don't come alone, and God knows I don't do this work alone. And with me today are many of your friends from our office: Gabe Vietor, our Chief Deputy; Kate Cook, First Assistant; Elise Yannette, Director of Strategic Initiatives; Mary Beckman, our Healthcare and Fair Competition Chief; Cindy Mark, who's Chief of our Public Protection and Advocacy Bureau, are with us as well as Chloe Gotsis and Jillian Fenimore and Catherine Thibodeau. Appreciate everything that you do, and it's just a reflection of the whole team there. And I just want to say publicly, because this is my last, though I hope it's not the last time I'm before you, but this is the last time I'm before you as Attorney General, that I am grateful, and I want us all to just take a moment to give a round of applause to the team in the Attorney General's office. Because were it not for their work, they're the ones keeping the lines of communication open. They're the ones regularly engaging with folks and stakeholders in the business community all around this state. And they are the ones who have really driven the people's law firm and delivered the results for people in this state. You know, I said I was excited to be here, and I am excited to be here, but I'm also a little bit reflective. You know, 8 years I've come before you, and more than that, in rooms large and small, I've gotten to be friends with so many of you, and I just want to take a moment to thank you for what you've taught me, what you've helped me to see. You've made me a better leader, you've made me a better public servant, and you've made our work better, and I thank you for that. There are many questions right now, not just about whether the Celtics will do this in 6 or 7, but there are serious questions, right? Serious questions. How do we bring the vibrancy back to the downtown? What's the future of work really going to look like? How are we, after COVID, going to chart a path forward, knowing that to do so, we're going to have to address real issues of affordability, housing, and transportation? How do we make Greater Boston and Massachusetts a magnet, a place where people want to come and study and learn and build companies and also stay? I've said for a long time that Massachusetts is the state with the most going for us. We have the greatest assets when you think about it: human capital, intellectual capital, innovation, research, know-how, academe. We've got an engaged, very engaged business community. But I think the question for Massachusetts right now is, how are we going to fight to be competitive? How are we going to make sure that our families and our residents and our businesses are in an economy that is thriving and that we are able collectively to drive? And I stand before you today as a government elected, and I realize the decisions that government makes have a direct impact on what we incent and what we disincentivize. We're at a critical time, I think, in Massachusetts. You know that. We're at a critical time in this country. But my money's on Massachusetts because of what we have here in our collective capacity. And I know as well that over the last, so I just want to be clear, because I'm going to talk about some stuff that is not so great, right? You know it, you live it every day. But I want to begin with the premise that we are in a state with so much going for us. So much. We just got to harness it. We just got to drive it. Now, over the past couple of years, we have been through a lot. We have managed a lot. I've made it a priority to get out around the state, especially focusing on communities hard hit, focusing on vulnerable small businesses. I continue to be so inspired by people's perseverance and their resilience. We've been there as an office for the business community from the beginning of all this, working with our hospitals and our educational institutions to help navigate the challenges they faced early on, providing guidance on federal loans and pushing for more financial support from employers, awarding hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants to assist small businesses with their payroll, lost sales, rent, and utility payments, and other expenses incurred by the pandemic. I've been so proud to partner with the Chamber on initiatives during this time, including initiatives to provide pro bono legal assistance and business advisors to assist and empower businesses, including women-owned and minority-owned businesses. Now, while we've all been working through this pandemic, the work of the office has continued in other ways as well, starting with a massive $1.8 billion resolution with Navient over student loan servicing practices, which is going to help thousands of borrowers across Massachusetts. We put bipartisan pressure on Instagram and Target and targeted TikTok as well for what they're doing to our kids online. We recently supported our cities and towns by going after manufacturers of PFAS, who not only are putting our firefighters' health and safety at risk, but are also polluting through their chemicals our drinking water and our natural resources. We recently took on hate and bias, launching programming for school administrators, athletic directors, and coaches, specifically with respect to what's happening in some of these youth sports teams. You know that as a civil rights lawyer, combating hate, discrimination, all of that is something that I think proudly we all stand united against. But I saw too much of it happening over the last year with some of our youth sports, and so we recently launched a new initiative to help empower our young people and head that off. We also, of course, recovered over $500 million. $500 million my office did from opioid manufacturers, which will be used exclusively to fund treatment, recovery, and prevention here in Massachusetts. And I'm really, really grateful to the team for the work on that. So today I want to speak about something that I know is on everyone's mind, and that is affordability. The impacts of this, of course, are vast. Families struggling to get by, costs eating away at people's safety nets. We see this even in the acutely rising rate of food insecurity across the state. The racial wealth gaps that have persisted for far too long are only being reinforced. And in general, too few are unable to buy a home, build wealth, or invest in their children's future. I know you see the impact in the business community every single day. You have employees who are moving away, who have moved away, who are thinking about leaving their jobs for higher wages, or needing to stay home to take care of their children because childcare is too expensive. You're also having to adapt to rising costs of goods and services and materials and gas and other supply chain issues. So we've got an affordability issue on our hands, that is for sure, and we're also facing threats of inflation and what comes with that, a global conflict over gas, decades of underinvestment in housing and transportation, and a politics that is divisive and toxic. Now, Massachusetts has done so much to attract business to our state. Look at our life sciences landmark law, creating what is now a global epicenter for the industry. We're also on our way to leading the American offshore wind industry. We're home to some of the best hospitals, universities, and innovative companies in the world. But companies need employees, and both employees and employers are facing real questions right now about whether they can afford to live here. So we need to act now. I think this starts with housing. I've had a lot of conversations with a number of you, and whether I'm speaking to a resident in any number of regions in the state, or I'm talking to a CEO, the top issue that people talk about right now is housing, the high cost of housing. So what are we going to do about it? And this is not just an issue in Greater Boston. The median cost of a single-family home right now in Massachusetts is $535,000. $535,000, the median cost here in Massachusetts. That's 30% higher than it was just 2 years ago. For those of you spending time on the Cape, you know we don't have enough workers to keep restaurants open, hotels open, and things going because of housing. People who have left New York, they've come to Western Massachusetts, even as far as Leominster and Fitchburg, and they're buying up homes and driving up the prices. Older residents are hanging on, staying in their homes because they can't actually afford to even downsize. Younger residents, of course, can't buy a place because investors and corporations are coming in, scooping them up with cash. So we've got to take aggressive action. It's an economic imperative. It's also a matter of public health and a matter of racial and social justice. And I think we know what we need to do. We need a lot more housing. We need a lot more housing stock of all kinds across this state. We need to increase state resources for that. We need to relax and address some of the zoning barriers that get in the way. We need to increase first-time home ownership and help close the racial wealth gap through expansion of down payment assistance programs and housing counseling. And we need to create units around public transit. This makes a lot of sense. We can't keep pushing people further and further out of our cities, further away from train stations, and expect them to be able to commute into work. And in the meantime, we need to do everything we can to make sure that our rental assistance and mortgage assistance programs are reaching people. This means language access, bridging the digital divide, publicizing resources, and making sure that we are empowering communities to enact rent stabilization policies. The reality is that we're going to need funding for these projects, we know, but I hope I can count on the Chamber to be a strong partner in the voice for finding solutions to our pressing housing challenges. The same goes for transportation as well, and I know that the Chamber has invested a lot of time and a lot of study on this, and I want to thank Jim for your leadership on this. We all had to get here today, whether it was through car, train, bus. I mean, for all of us, the trip probably took too long. It was maybe cost too much. It certainly created pollution along the way. We've got work to do. Our transportation system desperately needs an overhaul. We need to invest in transportation to make sure that it's reliable and safe and accessible. You know, as a proponent of somebody who wants to get more people out of their cars and onto public transportation as a way to address really, in critical climate issues, we're not going to get there. People can't be expected to do that unless we've got buses and trains and commuter rails and the T running on times that make sense and that actually are guaranteed to get people safely from point A to point B. So we've got to be thinking about Massachusetts, our entire bus and rail system, not only as a means of rush hour travel, but as a system that serves the entire state, one that reflects changed, and I mean changed, demographics and trends. Instead of just talking about major transportation projects, we really need to plan and execute. We've got to get going on these things. Things like West-East Rail, South Coast Rail, the Alston Multimodal Project, the Red-Blue Connector, and the extension of the Blue Line to Lynn, just as examples. And I understand trepidation about taking on big projects, but if we don't do it now, when are we going to do this? And we can't just expand what we have. We've got to do it in a way that harnesses the latest technologies and that allows us to do this with a clean tech approach that will build the kind of transportation system that we need now and for the future. Remember, folks, 40% of those greenhouse gas emissions that we're focused on in the state are driven by transportation emissions. So we need to do it for a number of reasons. And that's why I think it's really important that we electrify public transit, that we put new electric vehicles on the road, that we build the infrastructure to support them, that we incent the creation of pedestrian walkways and safe expanded bike lanes. And as somebody who is a big proponent of electric vehicles, I understand that for those of us in the city or people of particular income levels, that's not going to be the ticket necessarily. So while we have to build out infrastructure across the state for electric vehicles, we've also got to figure out what to do when it comes to people in concentrated areas of living. Now, the good news here, because I have been out and about and talking to a lot of people, listening to a lot of people, Massachusetts has the opportunity to be the clean energy hub, the clean tech hub of the country. Just within this 5-mile vicinity, we have the companies that are innovating right now, that are developing all the technologies that are going to power not only this country, but this world away from fossil fuels. So we've got to harness that here in Massachusetts. And I believe we should be positioning Massachusetts as a climate corridor where we can be a hub for these innovative technologies, where we can bring together and train up a workforce, and we can address what is so important, not just with respect to transportation, but everything else. Because right here, we've got it all. We've got the companies, we've got the technologies, we've got the private equity money, we've got incredible research and academia at our public and private universities right now developing all of this. And I think this is going to be really, really key to Massachusetts' future. And we need a state government that is focused on this and the ways in which the climate crisis can impact everything that we do, from our schools to entrepreneurship to transportation. And that's also why I've called for the creation of a climate chief, because it's not good enough to have somebody sit within the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs and drive this. No, climate is an issue. It's an economic issue. It's an issue that cuts across so many different fronts. And that's why we need to have somebody separately being able to drive that through all the various agencies. One other area I wanted to touch upon was childcare. I think I came before you last year and I talked to you about this, that we needed to, as a state, really rethink how we approach early education and childcare. And 1 year later, it's not gotten any better. In fact, we have 10% fewer slots for childcare than we did a year ago. Our infant childcare costs are second highest in the country. Parents in the state are paying almost as much for babies in childcare as they are to send their children off to a public university. That's what's happening in Massachusetts. And of course, we know that the cost of childcare has meant that any number of women have left the workforce or are not returning to the workforce. In fact, the percentage of women in the workforce right now is lower than it was when Ronald Reagan was president. Isn't that amazing? That's what's happening. And of course, when you look at the fact that 40% of our early education and child care workforce, 40% are women of color, what's happening there is folks they're just fried. They're burnt out and they're leaving. And if you're getting paid $17, $18, $19 an hour, and Amazon and Target have come to town and paying $24, $25 an hour, I don't begrudge them for leaving, but that is what is happening, and it's a shame. We can't keep losing this talent. And we're not going to recover, and we're not going to be competitive without affordable early education and care. So I think we need a game change here. I'm proud to stand with many of you in support of the Common Start legislation. The Ed Committee just recently released their bill, and while it doesn't do everything, it does represent a major step forward in addressing this issue. You know, making child care free for the lowest income families, limiting child care costs to a percentage of income, significantly increasing pay for early educators to address this workforce crisis. We've got to act now and pass legislation. We also need to create an early education and child care workforce pipeline, as I mentioned, with expanded access to career development opportunities and a real focus here. And we need to continue to keep up our advocacy alongside our congressional delegation to secure more funding for this in the long term. I know that I am committed to it, and I know that you are committed to this as well, recognizing it as the problem that it is. Now, I want to close with something, and you probably expected me to say something about this, and that is the Supreme Court's leaked draft opinion on Roe that will come out any day now. And I want to mention this in the context of what has been our partnership. You know, we've done a lot together over the last 7 years, 8 years almost, in my time as Attorney General. And I think about a couple things. You know, years ago, I had left private practice. I was a junior partner at Maura Healey, representing businesses, you know, for a good 8 or 9 years, and then left to become head of the Civil Rights Division. And the first major case that I was involved in and had the privilege of leading was when our office sued then President Obama to challenge the Defense of Marriage Act. This is the law that basically told married same-sex couples here in Massachusetts that they weren't married in the eyes of the federal government and not entitled to benefits and protections. One of the things that we did, and I had the privilege of working with members of the Chamber on, was putting together a business brief. And the business brief basically spoke from the perspective of companies, explaining that equality wasn't just good for society, it was also a smart business decision. It's what your employees wanted. And when the Supreme Court struck down DOMA and we won that case, you know the brief they cited? It was the business brief. And I really appreciate and credit the work done on that. I credit the work and the voice of this community years ago when other states were discriminating against transgender folks. And we stood together, many of us in this room, to support anti-discrimination protections. And the business community effectively made the case that discrimination was not good for business. Similarly, we worked together on issues of student debt. Jim and I convened the student debt working group years ago, recognizing this as the issue that it was, and we actually brought together great leadership from the business community, nonprofits, and government to exchange ideas about how to improve access to higher education, and that led us to develop some initiatives to increase information and transparency to students about actual costs, programs to support more affordable paths to graduation in the workforce. We developed even a partnership to help the most distressed borrowers get legal help as they were navigating bankruptcy caused by their student debt. And probably, you know, to go way back to the beginning of my term as your Attorney General, pay equity. The legislature passed the pay equity law. And it fell on me in our office to figure out what regulations were going to look like. And my instinct was to reach out to you, to talk to business lawyers, to figure out a way to develop regulations that made sense. I'm really proud of that partnership because, you know, as a result of our working together, through your feedback, through the work we did together, we were able to develop regulations that I think became a model for other states. So, look, I could go on. I could go on and talk to you about the work and the conversations and the movements that we've made on so many fronts. And I cited those examples because, you know, these were things that I dealt with as Attorney General and maybe places where people might not have expected me to work directly with the Chamber, but we did, and we were better for it. And so as I think about what's happening right now and what we're facing, with further restrictions to abortion, and that is what is going to happen. In a matter of weeks, we're going to see, in a matter of weeks, maybe a matter of 3 months, we're going to see over half the states in this country essentially restrict, limit, cut off access to safe and legal abortion in their states. So that is going to be the reality. And the reality is that, you know, as a result of abortion restrictions laws in our country, we're estimated to lose about $105 billion a year in GDP. Why? Because it actually affects whether women go to school, stay in school, join the workforce, stay in the workforce, contribute to our economy. And so I raise this in this room of friends because I want this to be something that you're thinking about how you within organizations and companies are going to be helpers in this moment. Because you've got a lot of women out there in your own ranks who are depending on that, you know, who are really depending on that. And so I hope we can work together to do what needs doing here in this state to make sure that we are recognizing and living true to the principle of women's equality and finding ways to support all of our employees during this time. Again, I close by thanking you for our partnership over the years. Thank you for the work that you do within your organizations and your teams. And I really believe it. I really believe it. It's about teamwork. And I don't just say that as a point guard. As some of you know, the greatest statistic for a point guard is the assist. And quite honestly, that's how I view the role of government. How are we assisting, right? How are we making things go? How are we getting the best play out of every teammate, right? Whether they're in the business community or academe or NGO or government or just residents, right? How are we going to do this together? Certainly the times present a tremendous urgency, a tremendous challenge, but again, I choose to see them as opportunities. And my money's on Massachusetts because I believe in the people of this state and I believe in this state. And again, thank you for having me this morning. Thank you.
Attorney General, as you have, I'd like to just spend a moment myself reflecting on the last 8 years in our partnership. You mentioned many of the issues that we collaborated on together, and you picked up the phone and said, Jim, you know, what do you think? What do your members think about these issues? You mentioned women's pay equity, the student loan crisis, CORI reform, transgender rights, issues affecting the Financial Services Committee. And even before we came up on stage today, over in the corner there, the Attorney General said, what do your members think about this issue? So it's been a constant dialogue like that, and I don't think the business community could have been any more well-served in terms of partnership with the Attorney General's office than we have over the past 8 years. So thank you for that. I do want to touch on some of your comments, and I'll ask the room for questions in just a moment. You mentioned the supply and demand issue of housing, which I know that's the place we've been in. You mentioned electrification and the need to enhance the grid. So much of that, particularly in Massachusetts, given that we're made up of 351 cities and towns, and we invented the town meeting, rests on sort of local control. And we're going to have to get community buy-in. Strategically, you know, the hammer doesn't always work. And I'm just wondering, to get these things done in which partnership, teamwork among cities and towns is going to happen to get there, do we need a new approach between state government and the communities to get these critical things done?
Well, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm the daughter of a selectman in a town of what was 1,500 people. I'm the stepdaughter of a selectman in a town that has now grown to 2,200 people. And look, I love town meeting. I love local government. I love all of our 351 cities and towns. But we have to acknowledge that we are unique compared to some other states. And, you know, there are states right now that are booming. Texas is a state with the fastest rate of inbound business, okay? Now, they want to demonize LGBTQ kids. They want to cut off access to abortion. You know, they want to do all sorts of things that, you know, I think a lot of parents and folks here in Massachusetts are not supportive of. But, Jim, the reality is we need to, as a state, take a hard look right now at what is working and what is holding us back. And that's what I mean about working together, because we've got to find a way for some give and take on this. Otherwise, we're not going to be where we need to be. I'm telling you that we are, in a really great position, but we're also in a position, and you know this, we're in a position of losing competitive advantage. And some would say we've already lost competitive advantage vis-a-vis some other states. So we got to have that conversation. I absolutely believe it's the case. I mean, isn't it better with your kids when you can cajole them and get them into something, to believe in something like this is, yes, I want to eat my broccoli, right? That's fantastic. You don't want to have to come with a hammer. Now, as somebody who's come with a hammer, I get it. I've come with a hammer for a long time on a lot of fronts, not afraid to do that. But that's not how we get the kind of buy-in, right? We've got to get people to see the common collective in the work that we do. And that's why, I have talked explicitly about housing and about addressing some of the zoning barriers. Because if you're not willing to have those conversations and do that work, then it's hard to see, how we get to where we need to be in terms of some of the social justice issues that many people have been talking about in certain communities for a long time, right? So that's my approach. We've got to work together and certainly be open to changing the way in which some things are done. I mean, if anything, with COVID, didn't COVID at least give us an opportunity to see everything got disrupted and dismantled? All of the norms that we lived by were changed overnight. We got to have that same nimbleness right now when it comes to government and how we look to move forward. And the time, we just don't have the time. We don't have the luxury of time on this.
I want to ask a question about the tax system and whether or not it needs to be looked at to reflect the new economy. And just by way of background, as you think about the COVID experience, companies represented in this room and throughout Massachusetts work with employees, and still are, to support more flexible remote work arrangements, better aligning with employee needs. During the height of the pandemic, companies invested in new technologies and continue to do so to safely and effectively operate remotely. As the Massachusetts economy recovers, the new normal for many companies is now to review each of their job openings and the job requirements and consider the costs of that position being in Massachusetts or being remote. You can work from anywhere now. Are there ways that policymakers should be looking at the Commonwealth's tax system to better reflect this current economy and remove any barriers to sort of those people being in Massachusetts as opposed to the incentives being to have them work remotely?
It's a great question, an important question. Some of you know that while my folks are from Newburyport, I grew up just over the border by Hampton Beach in the Granite State, like Brian, right? As much as I love the Granite State, I want Massachusetts to be number one. The answer to that is yes, we have to look at these things. We have to look at what's happening right now in the midst of the inflation that we're dealing with, the tax relief that we need to give to families right now and the money that we need to find ways to put back in people's pockets. But we need to do the broader look at recognizing that COVID has catapulted us to a different place in terms of where people work, the nature of how people work, where they literally are working from. I know it's something that CEOs and leaders are grappling with right now. How do you get those people to stay with you? How do you make sure that they're supported and working, right, and connected to the organizations? But we've got to find ways, absolutely as a matter of policy, to make sure that we are supporting and investing in our companies and in a workforce. And that goes absolutely to issues about decisions that people are going to make around their kitchen table about where they're going to live. And, it is very, very important.
So questions? I know my friend Paul there he is. Paul, we missed you at the speaker's breakfast. Paul Paravano from MIT. Paul's microphone.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Madam Attorney General, it's such a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for the strong voice you've given to these critical issues that you've talked about. Nothing more important than good public transit for people with disabilities. What I wanted to ask you is, there hasn't been, I think in my view, enough visibility for this, but we're now in the month of June when we're celebrating 50 years of Title IX. And as the father of a daughter who's a gifted athlete, I've seen firsthand the joy that it brought her to enjoy the benefits of Title IX. And of course, Title IX is not just sports, but it's just been such an important aspect of the lives for young people and for young women to have this opportunity that Title IX has brought to them. We're not completely there. There still are some areas that I think ought to be strengthened, but I wonder if you, as a uniquely positioned individual who's played sports and fought for other Title IX related issues, if you would comment on the importance of this anniversary. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Paul. It is. It's 50 years of Title IX, and I know that I would not actually be before you here today in this capacity were it not for Title IX, because Title IX is the law that actually enabled me to go out and be able to participate in sports through high school, through college, ultimately on the professional level, in a way that I wouldn't have before. And of course, Title IX, you know, it gets the conversation gets taken over by sports. It's about a lot more than sports. It's about educational opportunities and equality in those opportunities across a range of topics. But as a former jock, I guess I'll speak to the sports issues because it is really significant what it has done for women in terms of empowering them. We know that women who are able to go on and play sports in college, for example, tend to have, you know, higher levels of confidence and find themselves in leadership positions, whether in C-suites or in government. It does mean a lot. It can deliver a lot. Unfortunately, you know, while I see that a lot of wonderful things have happened, more and more women are out there playing, more and more girls. I mean, when I was growing up in 4th and 5th grade, 6th grade through 8th grade, I think I was like 1 or 2 girls in a team. The rest were boys. You know, I played baseball until I was 8th grade, and then I realized I needed to switch and play tennis after I pitched. I played shortstop and I pitched, and I remember I balked and walked a kid in, and that was, I think, the last time I pitched. But the point was, that's the truth. But my point was, growing up for me, it was just me, maybe one other girl, and boys. So that's different now. Isn't that great? And I see more women coaching, which is really, really important. I would love to see more women coaching boys' youth teams, right? Because that's an important modeling experience. I would like to see the NCAA not having had to been shamed into actually calling the NCAA March Madness tournament March Madness for women instead of something else. The money spent on the marketing of women in sports is just so way low compared to what it is for men. And, you know, we've got work to do, Paul. That is for sure. But, you know, hopefully I'd love to find ways to be able to continue to work to champion equality across all fronts for women and girls. It's really, really important. And look, it goes back to my comments earlier. You know, when you look at what certain policy decisions are being made out there by certain players, you know, think about what the impact is on the life course and trajectory of a young girl. And this stuff does really matter.
Not to mention those pictures that went viral of the men's workout room versus the women's workout room.
Well, right, they got shamed into having to do it.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. I have plenty of questions, but I wanted to bring up fossil fuels. You know, you mentioned climate change, and there's some efforts within the Commonwealth, legislation, in fact, that will get us to certain milestones by 2050 and so forth. And some would be very aggressive about that in terms of the conversion. What do you think the path forward is over the next, whatever that math is, 28 years in terms of that conversion? I know you've focused a lot on the utilities and gas, and everyone in this room, all businesses are thinking about their environmental issues and so forth, be it buildings or their own fleets. But what do you think about that conversion process?
Well, it is a conversion. It is a transition. And always tried to be honest and straightforward about things, and I will about this topic. We can't just flip it overnight. What I've said, Jim, though, is that we've got to be ambitious about our goals. It's why I've called for the doubling of wind targets, quadrupling of storage targets. This is another space, like the people, storage. A lot's happening in China. A lot else is happening here in Massachusetts, probably the only state in the country where it's happening, which is also an economic opportunity for us. Increasing solar and the like. But, it does require some of the less, some of the more important work has got to be happening around things that don't get talked about too much, and that's the building out of transmission lines. It's modernizing the grid. All this is going to take time. It's all going to take money, of course, but I think that we have the ability right now to strategically invest in those industries and also create tons of great paying green jobs along the way. But we have to recognize that it is a transition. And I understand not everyone can get a heat pump tomorrow. I know that. Not every business right now. I mean, you go out, I think about my friend who runs a manufacturing facility out in Western Mass. And, I know what people are paying right now when it comes to their bills. We've got to find a way to make sure that we do this where businesses are able to survive, people are able to afford it, and it is going to be a balancing act. So, I want to be somebody, as I've said, who's aggressive about this, who's ambitious about this. Let's make sure that we're harnessing the technologies that we have that are being created here. We know it's an economic imperative. That's why when the former president pulled out of Paris, while I thought that was most unfortunate, I also knew, because I'd watched what happened during the trajectory of our lawsuit against ExxonMobil, the market moved. The market knows where it needs to go here, so we just got to work together on that.
Okay, we don't have time for me to ask you a question about our former president, so so I'll leave that alone. Please join me in thanking Attorney General Healey for joining us here today. Attorney General, I look forward to those telephone calls during the day, sometimes at night, when an issue comes up and the partnership that we've had over the years. And as I said at the beginning, I'm very grateful that the Attorney General will now have a meet and greet conversation with the Chamber's City Awake Young Professionals participants. So thank you for doing that. That'll happen in an adjacent ballroom. And for the rest of you who are too not young for that, have a great day.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, everybody, and big thanks to Jim Rooney for your partnership and friendship. Thank you.